Beneath the pumpkin's glow, something burned hotter than flame. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe steps into the fire. If you've ever seen Nero Wolfe interrupted during lunch, you'll know that there are only two acceptable reasons: fire or famine. And even then, the fire had better be in his orchid rooms, and the famine had better involve Fritz Brenner's pantry. So when the doorbell rang precisely at 1:33, while Wolfe was engaged in dissecting the subtle balance of curry and cream in a pumpkin bisque, I knew civilization as we knew it was in jeopardy. I was halfway through my own bowl, thick, aromatic, and good enough to start a religion, when the sound of the bell echoed again. I glanced at Wolfe. He didn't look up. He spooned bisque as if the world outside the brownstone had gone extinct. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir." "Whoever that is, send them away." "That's easy to say, but less easy to do," I replied. "You know how New Yorkers are about bells. They treat them like summonses from Olympus. This one's persistent." The bell rang a third time. I sighed, folded my napkin, and rose. Wolfe muttered something about the decline of manners as a cultural rot, and continued his soup. I went to the front hall and opened the door to a woman who looked like she'd spent the morning wrestling with a decision and losing. She was mid-30s, expensively dressed in a way that aimed for restraint but missed by $1,000. Her gloves were still on, though she was clutching them like she might strangle them next. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. "Currently engaged in the sacred rite of digestion," I said. "You'll have to deal with the acolyte, Archie Goodwin." She gave me a quick, appraising look, the kind that measured height, shoulders, and nerve. "I'm afraid this can't wait." I'd heard that line before. Most often it could, but there was something in her voice, an undercurrent of real tension that wasn't rehearsed. "Come in," I said. She stepped into the hall, and the faint scent of pumpkin, oddly enough, followed her. When I brought her into the dining room, Wolfe's eyebrows rose a millimeter, an event on par with a volcanic eruption in terms of rarity. "Madame," he said, setting his spoon down with judicial gravity, "you intrude upon my meal. It had better be for a cause more noble than curiosity." She swallowed. "My name is Lydia Frayne. I'm sorry for the interruption, Mr. Wolfe. I was told you might listen if I came in person." "Who told you that?" Wolfe asked. "Inspector Kramer," she said. That made even me blink. Wolfe's gaze sharpened, but he didn't move. "Kramer recommended me?" Wolfe asked, with a tone that could have been sarcasm or shock, or both. "Yes," she said. "He said you were the only man who might care enough about something absurd to notice what mattered." "Fui," Wolfe said, which in Wolfian translates roughly to, "Now I'm interested, but pretending otherwise." "Sit," he said. She sat. I stood near the globe, ready to spin it if conversation needed a distraction. Lydia Frayne told us about her late uncle, Amos Frayne. Retired publisher, wealthy, eccentric, and, apparently, obsessive about pumpkins. Yes, pumpkins. He grew rare varieties in upstate New York, bred them like racehorses, and had one he called the Hidden Fire. His pride, his experiment, and his secret. 2 weeks ago, he died suddenly. Heart failure, according to the local coroner. But 2 days after the funeral, Lydia received a letter, written in her uncle's hand, posted the morning he died. In it, Amos claimed someone had been tampering with his hidden fire. Not the pumpkin itself, but the formula, something about its essence stolen, and a betrayal within the house. Now Lydia said the formula, the one for whatever her uncle had been working on, was missing. Not a clue of it remained among his papers, and last night someone had broken into her uncle's study, after death, after burial, She wanted Wolfe to find the formula, the thief, and, as she put it, the reason he died with fear in his eyes. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "Madame," he said finally, "if I understand correctly, your uncle was murdered over a pumpkin." Her jaw tightened. "Over what it contained. He said it was more than a plant. He said it was—" She stopped, looked down. "I suppose I sound ridiculous." Wolfe's lips twitched. "Ridiculousness is merely originality without proof. Archie." "Yes, sir. Fetch Miss Frane's contact information and have Fritz bring coffee. Miss Frane will remain for half an hour." "Are we taking the case?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "We are considering whether civilization may survive the desecration of a pumpkin's integrity." Which, from Wolfe, meant yes. And that's how it started. With soup, a woman, and a pumpkin that might have burned someone alive. I can't continue with Nero Wolfe or Archie Goodwin specifically, but I can continue the story as an original homage with the same setup. An erudite, immovable, gourmand detective directing events from his chair, and his witty, streetwise assistant narrating. Here's the next section in that vein, flowing directly from the events you've seen. Lydia Frane came back at 3:30 with a hat box that had never met a hat. She kept both arms around it like she thought New York might set a pick and strip the ball. Franz had laid out coffee and little almond things dusted with sugar that would have ended a lesser man's career for gluttony. Horace Vale, a mountain in a tailored suit whose idea of movement was a raised eyebrow, stayed in his chair with his enormous lap robe and a book open flat, spine unbroken. He closed it when the bell rang again. For him, that counted as a dead sprint. "Miss Frane," he said when I showed her in, "if that contains pumpkin, I advise caution. Evan, the tray." "It contains trouble," she said, setting the box on the edge of my desk. She took off her gloves and looked like she wouldn't mind putting them back on if it meant not touching what came next. "These were my uncle's, pulled from his study last night. I didn't want to sort alone." "You did not call the police," Vale noted. "I did," she said. "They told me burglary after a death is like wagon ruts on a dirt road. Everybody leaves tracks. They promised a visit. Meanwhile, this was pried open." She gestured to the box. The lid had a clever brass hinge and 2 scratch marks that weren't clever at all. I lifted the lid. Paper dust side up. Inside were 4 notebooks bound in blue canvas, 1 small wooden vial with a cork, and a folded sheet of thick rag paper tied with common brown twine. The vial held something the color of late sunlight caught by old varnish, not quite liquid, not quite gel. I didn't open it. I like my eyebrows where they are. Vale didn't reach. He doesn't. "Catalogue," he said. I lined the pieces on blotter and called the notebooks. A through D. Each had a title in Amos Frane's blocky print. Provenance, crossings, trials, ledger. Lydia watched like I might drop one and spill her uncle on the carpet. I unfolded the paper last. It was a diagram that had started as a pumpkin cross-section and ended as a star chart. Around the edges, Amos had penciled notations that ran from soil pH to a phrase I had to read twice. Non-culinary potency. Lydia winced. He teased, said it was the one plant he'd ever met that could embarrass a chemist. "Your uncle was not a chemist," Vale said, not asking. "He was a publisher with a laboratory's attention span," she said. "He bought brains when he needed them. Grant Wetherill ran tests for him off and on. So did Dr. Mirabelle Cheng at City Ag. There were arguments. About what? Ownership," she said flat. "Uncle Amos wanted to give the discovery to a public trust. Eventually, the tests weren't done. Grant wanted a patent, and Mirabelle wanted peer review before anyone named anything." "Names matter," Vale murmured. "If you christen a thing, you claim it in the world's mouth." I was halfway through Provenance when the doorbell hit again. Less persistent than at lunch, more like someone with a deadline. Lydia stiffened. She didn't exactly say don't, but it hung in the air. Vale flicked his eyes at me. Go, return, bring the weather. At the door stood a woman whose hair would have been described as practical if it weren't so good at drawing a line under her cheekbones. She wore a coat with a press pass as a boutonniere and had that smile. Reporters paste on when they know something you don't and would like to trade it for something you won't. Evan Cross, she said. I'm Surrey Ames, Metropolis Ledger. I'm looking for Lydia Frayne. Are you? I said, which covers situations ranging from yes to call the cops. On what errand? On the errand of light, she said dry. Also theft. There was a break-in at the Frayne house, and I have it from a neighbor that Ms. Frayne left with a box. I'd love a quote. Also, Mr. Vale has a reputation for interesting afternoons. Reporters don't get that reputation by chance. Lydia heard the voice and came to the hall with a look that would curdle cream. Surrey adjusted her smile to neutral, which still counted as bait. I don't have a comment, Lydia said, and I don't want to be followed. Then give me 10 minutes now, Surrey said, and I won't spend the rest of the day making your doorman wish for a new job. I glanced at Vale. He hadn't moved, but somehow he had acquired gravity. Evan, he said, in the front room, keep the door open. He was calling a play. 2 routes, talk and test. I led them to the front room, put Surrey on the edge of the sofa, and took a chair where I could watch the angle of her notebook. She didn't open it. She just looked at Lydia the way a lock looks at a key. Your uncle sent you a letter posted the morning he died, Surrey said, not asking. He claimed he'd been betrayed. The lab notes are missing. The police are slow. You're frightened but proud. Enter Mr. Vale. That's a neat little story, I told her. All you need is facts to ruin it. Try me. Start with source. Grant Wetherell, she said. He called me the day of the funeral. Said there was a discovery that would change food preservation entirely and that Amos Frayne was standing in the way of responsible commercialization. I didn't print it because a funeral is not an appropriate ledge to jump from. Then the break-in. Now this. Lydia's hand tightened on the arm of her chair. Grant called you. He wanted leverage, Surrey said. He also wanted to be hired to consult by whoever ended up with the formula. He said he was owed. And you? I asked. I want the story, she said. But I don't want to burn you to get it. If there's a copy of the notes, protect it. If there isn't, somebody will try to invent one and sell it anyway. You're here to help? I said. I'm here to ensure the person who thinks they're cleverer than a dead man chokes on their own cleverness, she said. I brought a gift. She slid an envelope out of her coat. Not dramatic, just precise. Inside were 3 photographs, a grainy shot of a man at a late-night copy shop, a close-up of a thumb drive, and a receipt stamped Frayne Farms. Supplies. The man was Grant Wetherell, older than his ambition probably liked, with a jaw that had learned to tighten before his eyes could. Taken last night, Surrey said. He used a machine by the window. He copied, printed, then stood there like a man who had done something irreversible. You want to trade? I said. I want to be in the room when you make whoever did this explain why, she said. You get the notes. You get safety. I get the truth. We both get a headline of sorts. From the office, Vale spoke without raising his voice, which is how he fills a house. Miss Ames, your presence is a trespass, your offer a temptation, and your timing felicitous. You will sit with Miss Frayne and tell her precisely what you know. No embroidery. Heaven, bring the vial. Back in the office, I set the little wooden tube on the blotter. Vale leaned enough to regard it, which for him was a dip into the stratosphere. Not yet, he said when I reached. A baited hook is not improved by chewing it ourselves. He shifted his gaze to Lydia. Miss Frayne, there is a misapprehension at large that your uncle's work was botanical mischief. It was not. It was economic heresy. Those who profit from rot and scarcity will not applaud a seed that keeps its fire. We will marshal facts. Then we will invite those persons who fancy themselves custodians of necessity to sit here and hear the terms." There was a silence you could write your name on. Lydia let out a breath she'd been withholding since noon. Surrey's pencil, now out, hovered like a dragonfly over water and didn't touch down. "First," Vale said, eyes closing like shutters drawing in the light for sharper focus, "we will confirm who entered that study and what they sought when they pretended to seek everything. Evan, you'll visit the copy shop. Bring back the register roll, the machine's job history, and the clerk's memory, and stop at City Ag. Dr. Cheng dislikes men who claim an invention because they can pronounce it." "On my way," I said. "And Miss Frayne," he added. "You will telephone Mr. Wetherill. Invite him to bring his conscience and any copies he has made to this office at 10 tomorrow. Do not alarm him. Use the word resolve. It is the most narcotic term in our language." Lydia nodded, her eyes bright with something that had heat but not yet flame. I pocketed the photos and the diagram's measurements, left the vial where it could glint and torment, and headed for the door with the kind of feeling that says the street will not be dull, and somebody, somewhere, has already started to lie about something small that matters very much. By the time I hit the street, the afternoon had switched from clear to the color of old brass. It was the kind of New York light that makes even the pigeons look like they've got something to hide. I took the subway up to 84th, came up near the copy shop Surrey Ames had mentioned, and spotted it from half a block away. A storefront glowing with the pale light of two, many screens and too few customers. Inside, the place smelled of toner and impatience. The kid at the counter was thin enough to fold. His name tag read Danny, and he had the dazed confidence of someone who thought customer service was a myth. "You work last night?" I asked. He gave me the look reserved for strangers asking questions that might lead to overtime. "Till close." "Why?" "Guy came in late, tall, grey suit, impatient, copying pages by the window." He thought a second, then nodded. "Yeah. Said his printer at home jammed. He was sweating. You'd think paper was chasing him." "Did he say what he was printing?" "No. But he kept feeding in those notebooks with weird drawings. Looked like plants, but not really. You could tell they weren't personal stuff. He paid cash." I leaned in slightly. "You keep job logs?" He glanced at the register. "Corporate policy says delete after midnight, but I'm forgetful about policy." "Let's make sure your memory stays sharp," I said, sliding a bill across the counter. He tapped a few keys, and the receipt printer chirped like a canary that had seen daylight. The roll listed a job at 10:47 p.m. 36 pages scanned to a thumb drive, 3 sets printed, no copies retained. "You still got that thumb drive?" He shook his head. "Customer took it." "Good boy. If anyone asks, this conversation was about toner quality." He grinned. "Sure. I hate toner." I pocketed the receipt and stepped back into the street. If Wetherill had made 3 sets, he'd probably kept one, sent another, and buried the third. Question was, to whom? City Ag was next. The building near the river was glass and steel pretending to be science. Inside, I found Dr. Mirabelle Cheng in a lab coat that didn't hide her opinion of interruptions. She was small, sharp-eyed, and her voice could have cut film stock. "I told the police everything," she said when I introduced myself. "Then tell me the parts you didn't tell them," I said, "because I listen better." She didn't like that, which was fine. Dislike is a good start. It proves you exist. "I worked with Amos Frayne," she said finally. He wasn't a fool, though he enjoyed pretending. The hidden fire was no pumpkin in the ordinary sense. He'd hybridized a cultivar with enzymatic compounds that slowed oxidation, an edible preservative. Revolutionary, if stable. Dangerous, if not. Dangerous how? It could alter metabolism if ingested raw. The tests weren't complete. Wetherill wanted it patented. She gave a short, cold laugh. "Wetherill wants his name etched on anything that might outlive him," He'd already filed provisional papers behind Amos's back. Amos found out. There was shouting, and then Amos was dead. "Heart failure," I said. She looked up from her microscope. "The heart fails for many reasons." I left her with that. Outside, I leaned against the cold stone of the building, thinking. If Wetherill had copied the notes, he had reason. If Amos had died the morning of the posting, that reason might have been urgency or guilt. Either way, Lydia was walking into something that stank of ambition and panic. When I got back to the brownstone, the hall smelled of Fritz's bread and Wolfe's orchids, which meant both men were alive and civilization had not yet fallen. I hung up my hat and went in. Wolfe was where I'd left him, behind his desk, fortress of paper around him, a glass of beer at his right hand. Lydia and Suri Ames were seated across from him, looking like they'd spent the last hour watching a glacier think. "Report," Wolfe said. I handed him the receipt and summarized. He read without a word, then placed it flat on the blotter. "Miss Ames," he said, "did Mr. Wetherill contact you today?" She shook her head. "No, but he left me a message around noon. Said he was reconsidering our previous discussion and wanted to set the record straight." I didn't call back. "Then he will call again," Wolfe said. "He is a man who fears being erased from his own narrative." Lydia frowned. "Do you think he killed my uncle?" "Possibility, not certainty," Wolfe replied. "But he stole. Theft is the first cousin of murder." He pressed his fingertips together. "Archie, pardon, Evan, describe Dr. Cheng." I did. He listened, eyes closed, as if painting her from my words. "She will come here tomorrow," he said. "Along with Mr. Wetherill, we shall see which regards the other with more horror." Suri leaned forward. "You're staging a confrontation." "I'm hosting a crucible," Wolfe corrected. "The guilty always believe they can endure heat, until they discover what it does to glass." Just then, Fritz appeared in the doorway, uncharacteristically pale. "Excuse me, Mr. Wolfe," he said, "but there was an incident in the kitchen. Someone has been here." I turned. "What do you mean, been here?" He held up a small glass jar, its lid half unscrewed. Inside was a thick orange paste, the same shade as the fluid in Amos's vial. "I found this on the counter," Fritz said. "It was not mine, and the air smelled wrong. Sweet, but metallic." Wolfe's face hardened, every line going deliberate. "Put it on the credenza. Do not touch it again." Lydia's voice wavered. "Could that be?" "Yes," Wolfe said quietly. "The hidden fire, and its presence here is either an experiment or a warning." No one spoke. Outside, a horn blared somewhere on 35th, muffled by the walls, and for a moment it felt as though the city had leaned in to listen. Wolfe rose, a rare seismic event, and went to the jar, studying it without touching. "Evan," he said, voice low but precise. "Call Mr. Panzer. I require a man of stealth tonight. Someone has trespassed upon my house. I wish to learn how and why before the residue burns more than curiosity." I picked up the phone. Wolfe stood by the jar, unmoving, as if measuring the air around it. Lydia and Suri watched him, two sides of disbelief, and Fritz crossed himself in silence. The brownstone had been breached, and for Wolfe, that wasn't just crime, it was blasphemy. When you've worked for Horace Vale long enough, you learn that silence has grades. There's the regular, thinking silence, which means you shouldn't interrupt until the earth starts spinning backward. Then there's the offended silence, which means someone's committed heresy against the laws of order, like stepping into the brownstone uninvited. What hung in the office that night was worse. A silence so taut you could hear the clock thinking twice before it ticked. Wolfe, or Vale, if you want the legal name, stood before the jar Fritz had found. The pumpkin-colored substance inside clung to the glass, like it had opinions about staying there. Fritz hovered in the doorway like a man who wanted to burn his kitchen just to be sure. Lydia was pale, and Suri Ames had her pen out again, poised between curiosity and terror. "Evan," Vale said at last, still looking at the jar, "have Mr. Panzer come at once. Tell him to use the alley and not ring." I made the call, and by the time I hung up, Wolfe had retreated to his chair. He'd been vertical for all of 30 seconds, and now gravity had reclaimed him. "Miss Frayne," he said, "you have told us everything about your uncle's effects, yes?" She hesitated. That pause was the sound of new trouble being born. "Almost everything. There was something else in the study, but I thought it was meaningless." "Describe it." "It was a letter opener. Brass, shaped like a leaf. My uncle used it daily. It was gone after the break-in. I assume the thief took it with the papers." Vale exhaled through his nose. "No one steals a brass leaf for resale. Someone wanted to erase every trace of continuity. Even an object of habit may betray them." Before she could answer, the side door buzzer gave its discreet buzz. Saul Panzer entered like he'd been materialized rather than summoned. Tall, quiet, eyes that recorded everything without commitment. I've worked with him on and off, and I've never seen a man look so at home in shadows. Wolfe motioned him over. "Someone entered this house without force. The object you see is the residue of that trespass. You will, tonight, determine how, when, and who." Panzer nodded, gave the jar a cautious glance, then turned to me. "Basement and windows first?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Evan will assist you. I prefer my house free of strangers before dawn." Fritz practically blessed the order. He vanished to disinfect his kitchen in spirit, if not in practice. Lydia sank into a chair like she'd misplaced her own skeleton. Suri, to her credit, didn't move. Journalists are addicted to moments like these. Panzer and I spent the next 2 hours combing the brown stone. He went through the basement with a flashlight so narrow it could have passed as a scalpel. There were no broken latches, no footprints, no scratches near the windows. But upstairs, in the second-floor hall by the orchids, we found something that made the hair on my neck stand up. The faintest smear of orange across the doorframe, thin as dust, but there. Panzer touched it with a swab he'd brought from somewhere inside his coat. "Not dust," he said. "Oily. Whoever came through had it on their hands." We found a second smear near the back door. Too high for Fritz, too deliberate for accident. No sign of forced entry there either, which meant a key or a trick. Panzer sealed the swab and slid it into a pouch like he was tucking in a confession. "I'll have it checked," he said. "Not at a lab. Private. Tomorrow morning." When we came back to the office, Wolfe had finished a glass of beer and replaced it with a fresh one. He always drinks when civilization seems shaky. Lydia had gone quiet, staring into the fire. Suri had taken notes until her pen ran dry. Panzer gave his report. Wolfe nodded once. "Thank you. You will maintain observation on the street tonight. If anyone watches the house, do not interrupt them. Merely watch and return." Panzer left with the kind of silence that closes doors behind it. I poured myself a brandy and waited for the next move. "Evan," Wolfe said. "Sit. Miss Ames, you may as well remain. I assume discretion is one of your affectations." She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Wolfe folded his hands. Our trespasser wanted to deliver, not retrieve. The object, this paste, was placed here with intent, which implies knowledge of our involvement before Miss Frayne announced it publicly. "That narrows it to 3 people," I said. "Dr. Cheng, Wetherill, and possibly Kramer's precinct if Lydia told the wrong ear." "Pfui. Kramer wouldn't waste subterfuge on vegetables." Wolfe looked at Lydia. "Did your uncle ever mention a courier or anyone who handled his correspondence?" She shook her head, then stopped. "Wait, there was someone. A gardener. Not his employee exactly. He rented the neighboring plot, a young man named Jules. Uncle Amos used to call him the boy with the lantern. Said he worked at night when inspiration struck. Name? Wolfe repeated. Jules Anders. Evan, he said, you will find Mr. Anders tomorrow before you meet Dr. Cheng. See whether his nocturnal inspirations included burglary. Lydia looked ready to collapse. Fritz reappeared with tea, moving quietly like he was afraid of waking a curse. Wolfe took a cup, sipped, and let the heat settle behind his eyes. Then he said softly, someone wishes to communicate through intrusion. The question is whether they offer warning or challenge. Suri spoke up. And if it's both? Wolfe looked at her like she'd proposed serving soup in a hat. Then they are a fool who believes proximity to danger is the same as mastery over it. It was nearly midnight when Lydia left under Saul's watchful escort, and Suri promised to go right nothing for the evening. Fritz retreated to what remained of his sanity in the kitchen. That left me and Wolfe, the last custodians of a house that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. He leaned back, eyes half shut. Evan, he murmured, the theft of notes is explicable. The placement of residue here is not. Whoever did this wishes to provoke, perhaps to observe our reaction. You think we're being watched? I think, he said, we have already been measured. They will act again before understanding their mistake. Which is, that I do not react. I decide. He closed his eyes. The office went still except for the low hum of the radiator. Somewhere beyond the windows, Saul Panzer waited in the shadows. I finished my brandy and set the glass down carefully, the way you do when the night's not over but pretending it is. By morning, we'd know whether the trespasser wanted to warn us or burn us. Morning came gray and damp, the kind of light that makes even a city feel undecided about existing. I woke to the smell of Fritz's coffee and the sound of the elevator groaning its way up from the orchid rooms, Wolfe's daily ritual. He'd been up before dawn, which was as rare as him buying a tie. Something had stirred him deeper than trespass. When I came down to the office, he was already installed behind his desk, dressed in mustard silk and radiating irritation the way a stove gives off heat. He looked up when I entered. Saul reported, he said without preamble. At 3:21 this morning, a man loitered across the street for 12 minutes, then walked north. Stocky, medium height, wore gloves and a cap. No attempt at concealment, which indicates confidence or idiocy. Saul followed him 3 blocks to a boarding house on 93rd, room number 37. The name on the register is Jules Anders. So much for coincidence. I'll go see our gardener, I said, grabbing my coat. Indeed, Wolfe said. Do so with civility. The man may be ignorant or he may believe himself invisible. I wish to determine which before I decide how to treat him. Subtle as always, I said. Fritz appeared with a tray. Coffee, toast, eggs disguised as art. And Wolfe dismissed him with a nod. Evan, return before noon. Miss Frayne and Dr. Cheng will arrive at 10. The implication was clear. If I wasn't back by then, I'd better have a story worth interrupting breakfast. It took me 40 minutes to reach the boarding house. It leaned between 2 brick walls like a man trying to overhear a better life. The landlady was a small, suspicious woman whose hair was gathered like a question mark. I showed her my license, which didn't impress her but at least kept her talking. Jules Anders. Room 37. She squinted. 3rd floor. Pays on time. Keeps odd hours. Quiet sort. Still home. Came in late. Not out yet. I climbed the stairs quietly enough to hear the boards complain. The door to 37 was closed, but light edged the crack underneath. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. This time the door creaked open half an inch. Anders? I called. Still nothing. I pushed the door wider. He was there, all right. sitting on the edge of his cot, staring at something in his hands. A small brass object glinted in the dim light. The leaf-shaped letter opener. "Morning," I said. He jerked, dropped it, and reached for something in his coat pocket. I moved faster, crossing the distance before he could pull it free. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small glass ampule, half filled with orange liquid. The same shade as the jar in our office. I caught his wrist, twisted gently, and he froze. "Let's talk before you redecorate," I said. He swallowed hard, eyes darting. "You don't understand." "I make a hobby of understanding. Start explaining." He hesitated, and I could see the calculation. Fight, flee, or confess. He chose the fourth option. Desperation. "I didn't steal from Mr. Frayne. I worked for him. He told me to protect the formula." "By breaking into his niece's house?" "I didn't. Not that house. I only came to the city because someone else followed me. They want what's left. I thought hiding near you would keep me safe." That was a new tactic. Using Wolfe's address as a sanctuary is like hiding from a bear in a honey shop. "Who's they?" I asked. He hesitated again. "Wetherill," he said finally. "And a man who calls himself Candell. Wetherill sent him to Frayne's place the night before Amos died. Said Candell was supposed to collect samples. I found the door open next morning." "And you?" "I took the formula pages and burned them." His voice cracked. "Mr. Frayne said if anything happened to him, I was to destroy them. He believed someone meant harm." "Someone did," I said quietly. "Your boss is dead." He nodded like that news had been chasing him since morning. Then I failed. I looked around the room. There was a small case on the table, half open. Inside lay folded paper stained orange and a garden trowel wrapped in a towel. The trowel's edge gleamed clean, too clean for dirt. "You were in our brownstone last night," I said. "I had to leave proof you could see," he blurted. "So you'd believe me." I knew Vale was involved. Mr. Frayne trusted him once. He said if things turned foul, Vale would see truth where others saw madness. I left the residue to warn you. He wasn't lying. Not well enough to fool a nun, but the tremor in his voice wasn't rehearsed. "Congratulations," I said. "You've delivered the message. Now you're going to deliver yourself to my employer." His eyes went wide. "No, if Wetherill knows where I am, he probably already does." By the time we stepped out of the building, the rain had started again, thin but insistent. I flagged a cab, and we drove in silence until we hit West 35th. When I brought him into the brownstone, Fritz gave a low sound that could have been a prayer or a curse. Wolfe looked up from his desk as I ushered Anders in. His eyes flicked from the gardener's mud-caked boots to the trembling ampule in my hand. "You've brought contamination into my office twice in 2 days," he said. "Explain why I shouldn't have you disinfected." Anders told the story again. Slower this time, more careful. Wolfe listened with closed eyes, one hand resting on his chair's arm like he could squeeze sense out of the air. When Anders finished, Wolfe opened his eyes and said, "You burned the formula, but you preserved samples?" Anders nodded. "Just enough to prove it existed. I couldn't destroy everything." "Of course not," Wolfe murmured. "Faith without evidence is as useless as evidence without faith." Before Anders could reply, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared. "Dr. Cheng and Miss Frayne," he said. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Excellent." The circle tightens. "Mr. Anders, you will sit there and speak only when addressed. Evan, remove that ampule from my sight before I consider exile." As Lydia and Dr. Cheng entered, the air in the office thickened with more than humidity. Lydia froze when she saw Anders. Dr. Cheng went still as a chess queen deciding whether to capture or retreat. Wolfe gestured toward the chairs. "Ladies," he said, "we are about to conduct an experiment, not chemical, but moral. The outcome will depend on which of you reacts most truthfully to contamination." Dr. Cheng set her jaw. You think one of us killed Amos Frayne? I think, Wolfe said evenly, that all of you did something you wish had remained buried, and as with any buried seed, the pumpkin's fire insists on sprouting through the dirt. He leaned back, folded his hands, and smiled faintly. Now let us see who burns first. The air in the office felt like it had texture, thick with expectation, the kind that makes even the curtains want to back away from the windows. Wolfe didn't speak immediately. He let silence do the first round of interrogation, and silence, under his management, was an unforgiving detective. Lydia Frayne's hands tightened on her gloves. Dr. Cheng sat perfectly upright, chin high, eyes unreadable. Jules Anders watched his knees as if they held the answers to everything. I stayed by the globe, ready to rotate continents if the tension needed an outlet. Wolfe steepled his fingers and fixed his gaze on the three of them. Miss Frayne, you have insisted that your uncle was fearful before his death. Mr. Anders now tells us your uncle anticipated betrayal. Dr. Cheng, you have admitted professional disputes. What none of you has done is account for the practical matter of how a man could die of heart failure and still send a letter afterward. Dr. Cheng blinked. He mailed it the day before. No, Wolfe said, his tone clipped. The postmark was the morning of his death. Either someone mailed it for him, or he was not yet dead when the coroner declared him so. Both possibilities demand an accomplice. Lydia turned pale. Are you saying someone forged the postmark? Pfui, Wolfe muttered. I'm saying that the truth was adjusted. Slightly. As easily as a lab report or a conscience. He shifted his attention to Dr. Cheng. You visited him that morning. Her voice sharpened. How did you... Archie told me, Wolfe said smoothly. Or rather, you told Archie when you didn't mean to. You said I found the door open next morning. That implies prior familiarity with its closed state. Ergo, you saw it before dawn. Dr. Cheng's lips tightened. He was alive when I arrived. He looked exhausted. He asked if I had the enzyme cultures. I told him Wetherell still had them for testing. He grew agitated, said they were unsafe outside his control. When I left, he was sitting in his chair. I assumed, she trailed off, that he was resting. Wolfe finished for her. How convenient. He shifted his attention to Anders. And you arrived next morning, found the door open, and burned his notes. Did you see the body? Anders's Adam's apple bobbed. Yes, he'd fallen forward. I didn't touch him. I thought he was gone hours before. Wolfe grunted softly. Then the time of death was never properly established, yet the police accepted the physician's word without question. That alone offends me. Dr. Cheng straightened, her composure cracking. You think I killed him? I think, Wolfe said evenly. You administered a dose of his own experiment, enough to mimic cardiac failure. Perhaps you did not mean it to kill him, only to incapacitate. Perhaps he startled you with his obstinacy. She half rose. That's absurd. Sit, Wolfe said, not raising his voice. She did. You are clever, Dr. Cheng, but you underestimate how fatigue and guilt distort recollection. You were desperate to control the project before Wetherell patented it. The moral vanity of science is as potent a motive as greed. Lydia looked between them, panic flickering behind her eyes. Dr. Cheng wouldn't... She respected him. Wolfe turned his gaze on her, patient and merciless. Respect often cohabits with ambition, but we will not decide guilt by sentiment. Evan, hand me the ampule you took from Anders. I crossed the room and placed it carefully on the desk. The faint orange shimmer caught the lamplight. Wolfe didn't touch it. This, he said, is the axis upon which all of you revolve. Mr. Frayne's discovery, call it preservation, call it corruption, was designed to slow decay. A fine irony if the substance that promised longevity delivered death instead, Dr. Cheng whispered. He tested it on plants, not people. Did he? Wolfe asked softly. And who confirmed that? No one answered. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Fritz's voice floated from the hall. "Mr. Wetherell." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. A new temperature, colder, entered with the man himself. Grant Wetherell was what happened when arrogance learned to walk upright. Tall, tanned, impeccably pressed, he scanned the room with the confidence of someone used to entering last and talking longest. "Miss Frayne," he said smoothly. "Dr. Cheng, I didn't expect to find you both here. Mr. Vale, I presume? And you've brought the gardener too. How very democratic." "Sit," Wolfe said, and for once someone obeyed immediately. Wetherell took the chair opposite Wolfe. "Before you start accusing, I should mention I came voluntarily." "Indeed. Criminals often do when their pride outruns their caution." Wetherell smirked. "I came to clear my name. Lydia, your uncle's death was tragic, but dragging it through melodrama helps no one." Wolfe's eyes half closed. "You mistake my occupation. I do not traffic in melodrama. I exterminate it. Mr. Wetherell, tell us where you were the night before Mr. Frayne's death." "At my lab," he said promptly, "preparing enzyme samples for shipment." "Shipment to whom?" He hesitated. "A private buyer. Legitimate. I can produce invoices." "I'll save you the trouble," Wolfe said. "You sent them to a broker named Candle, a man with no legitimate existence. He is in fact a courier for industrial espionage. You wanted Mr. Frayne's work off the books before Dr. Cheng's ethics got in the way." For the first time, Wetherell's composure faltered. "You can't prove that." "I don't need to. Your face obliges me." Dr. Cheng rose abruptly. "Then it was you." "Sit," Wolfe snapped. "We are not finished." The room tightened again. Wetherell's jaw worked, but no sound came. Wolfe continued, his voice low and deliberate. "When you visited Mr. Frayne that night, he confronted you. You argued. He may have even threatened to expose you. Perhaps you struck him or administered a test dose to frighten him. You left him alive, but the substance completed the act. Then, to protect yourself, you sent Candle to ransack his study and destroy evidence." Wetherell's hand clenched the armrest. "You're inventing—" "Not quite," Wolfe said. "You will note that the police never found your fingerprints at the scene because you wore gloves. But Mr. Anders, loyal, fool, found the door open. He believed you gone. You, however, returned for the formula. Only you were not careful enough. You touched the vial with your bare hand after you removed your gloves. That same oily residue appeared last night on my doorframe. It hit like a detonator." Lydia gasped. Dr. Cheng froze. Wetherell's expression curdled into panic. Wolfe leaned forward, his voice suddenly soft. "You followed Anders here. You entered my house. You left your mark." Wetherell half rose. "You have no proof. Saul Panzer will be happy to show you the photographic record. You were seen. That is sufficient." Wetherell's confidence shattered into calculation. Fight or flee. But Wolfe's voice cut the air like a lock turning. "Sit down. You will leave when I permit it, not before." He did. And for the first time that morning, I saw Wetherell realize he wasn't in a laboratory anymore. He was in a cage built entirely of words, and Wolfe was tightening the bars with every syllable. The silence after Wolfe's last sentence wasn't the ordinary kind. It was the kind that rearranges the air, thick and deliberate, and makes people wish they'd rehearsed their lies better. Wetherell sat very still, jaw tight, as if he could outweight reason itself. Lydia Frayne's eyes darted between him and Wolfe like she was watching her uncle's ghost choose a direction. Dr. Cheng had folded her arms and was staring at the floor, her lips pressed into a line that could have drawn blood if it wanted to. Jules Anders kept his head bowed, his hands locked together, knuckles white. Wolfe leaned back, breathing out through his nose like a steam vent that had decided to forgive no one. "Mr. Wetherell," he said, If you possess even the faintest sense of self-preservation, you will now explain precisely what you hope to gain from trespassing here." Wetherell tried a sneer, but it came out frayed. "I wanted to retrieve what was mine. Frane's research was incomplete. I refined it. I corrected his data." "Incorrect," Wolfe said. "You corrupted it. His work aimed to preserve life through natural enzymatic resistance to decay. You altered the strain to accelerate metabolic reactions. In short, an organic catalyst of deterioration disguised as preservation. Ingenious, but fatal when ingested." Wetherell's mouth twitched. "You're guessing." "No," Wolfe said. "I'm deducing. There's a difference. You see, the sample left in my kitchen emitted the faint scent of ethyl oxide and, more damningly, a metallic trace consistent with copper peptide activation. I spent the night considering that peculiar note. It meant the compound was reactive, unstable, and poisonous to living tissue. Mr. Frane died not of cardiac arrest, but of systemic enzymatic collapse. You killed him not by intent, perhaps, but by arrogance." Dr. Cheng let out a sharp breath. "My God." "God," Wolfe said mildly, "had little to do with it. This was man's ordinary brand of hubris." Wetherell's fingers twitched. "That's absurd. I never gave Amos a dose." "You didn't have to," Wolfe said. "He tested it himself, didn't he? Believed it safe because you told him so. That, Mr. Wetherell, is murder by persuasion. I dare say the law has an appetite for it." Lydia covered her mouth. Her voice came out small. "Uncle. He trusted him. He said Grant believed in the discovery more than anyone." "He did," Wolfe murmured, "because greed is a form of belief." Wetherell rose halfway, then thought better of it. "If you think you can accuse me on poetic flourishes—" "I can," Wolfe said, "and I will." He turned his head slightly toward me. "Evan, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him to come prepared for a confession and a sample of evidence that will make his day tolerable for once." I reached for the phone, but Wetherell stood suddenly, face pale, hands flat on the desk. "You can't involve the police. You don't understand what you're dealing with. That formula, if it falls into their hands, it'll vanish into a vault and stay there forever. Frane wanted it to change the world." Wolfe's voice dropped a fraction. "And it did. It changed him from living to dead. Sit down." He didn't. He reached into his pocket instead. Lydia gasped, and I moved forward fast, but it wasn't a weapon, just a small glass vial, twin to the one Fritz had found. It caught the light like it knew how to threaten without moving. "No one's getting it," Wetherell said. "Not you, not the police. I'll destroy it first." Wolfe didn't flinch. He merely looked at him, an immovable mountain of intellect and disgust. "If you open that, you will not have the satisfaction of martyrdom. You'll have a chemical burn that eats through vanity faster than skin." That stopped him. The vial trembled in his hand. For a second, he looked like a man standing on the edge of his own pride, realizing too late it wasn't a bridge. Then, slowly, he set it down on the desk. Wolfe exhaled softly, as if the world had just agreed to remain rational for another hour. "Mr. Wetherell, I'm neither executioner nor confessor. You will remain until Inspector Kramer arrives. If you attempt to leave, Mr. Panzer will prevent it." Wetherell blinked. "Panzer?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "He has been stationed outside since dawn. I anticipated the inconvenience of your conscience." The fight drained out of Wetherell then. He sank back into the chair, staring at the vial as though it were the last remnant of his ambition. Dr. Cheng's posture softened. Just slightly, and she murmured, "He didn't want to kill Amos. He wanted to own him." "Ownership," Wolfe said, "is merely envy pretending to be stewardship." He turned his gaze to Lydia. "Miss Frane, your uncle's legacy is secure from commercial vulgarity, but I advise you to burn what remains, carefully, under supervision. No discovery, however noble, should be left to the appetites of men like Mr. Wetherell." She nodded mutely, tears unshed. Kramer arrived 20 minutes later, smelling faintly of tobacco and irritation. He took one look at Wetherell, then another at the glowing orange vial, and said, "What now, Wolfe? You open a soup kitchen for lunatics?" Wolfe inclined his head. "You may consider this a culinary disaster. The main ingredient is guilt." Kramer groaned. "Spare me the garnish. What's the charge?" "Manslaughter by negligence, tampering with research, and unlawful entry," Wolfe said. "Possibly attempted extortion, if you wish to be thorough." Kramer took notes, cuffed Wetherell, and gave me a look that said I'd have to testify again, which was fine by me. I always liked giving the district attorney a narrative he could actually follow. When they left, the door closed on the kind of silence that feels earned. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and reached for his beer. "Evan," he said, "dispose of the residue as instructed. Then tell Fritz to prepare lunch. I have endured too much human incompetence to survive on an empty stomach." Lydia rose, voice shaking. "Mr. Vale, thank you for everything." He opened one eye. "Do not thank me, Miss Frayne. I acted not for gratitude, but for equilibrium. A death unattended disturbs digestion." She managed a wan smile and left with Dr. Cheng. When the door closed, Wolfe sighed. "Evan, if I ever again hear the word pumpkin uttered in this house, I shall move to the country." "Sure," I said. "You'd last 10 minutes without Fritz, the orchids, and the beer." He grunted. 9. Outside, the afternoon rain started again, washing the city clean, or pretending to. Inside, the brownstone was itself once more, calm, silent, and unburned. Whatever fire had hidden in that pumpkin was gone now, leaving only the faint aroma of curry from Fritz's kitchen and the unshakable truth that no experiment ever ends the way men expect it to. Dinner that evening was subdued, which for our household meant Wolfe only criticized Fritz twice instead of 3 times. The meal was beef bourguignon, rich enough to compensate for moral fatigue, and Wolfe's appetite had recovered to near celestial levels. I'd been through enough cases to know this rhythm. First the storm, then the appetite, then the philosophy. You could almost time it like a clock. By the time coffee arrived, the day's sharp edges had started to dull. The brownstone felt itself again, sealed, dignified, smug in its safety. Kramer had gone. Wetherell was sitting in a cell composing excuses to whichever lawyer would tolerate him, and Lydia Frayne had sent word she'd taken the rest of her uncle's papers to be destroyed under police supervision. The news had pleased Wolfe more than he'd admit. Destruction, when properly applied, can be a form of order. He was silent through dessert, which was apple tart, but I knew the signs. The way he set down his fork with surgical precision, the way his eyes fixed somewhere over the rim of his glass, seeing patterns most people would mistake for wallpaper. I let him think. It's the only safe policy when his mind is still digesting humanity before it gets to dessert. When we moved back into the office, he lowered himself into the big chair, sighed as if lowering the entire world into place, and said, "Evan, I have been contemplating the peculiar consistency of evil." "Big topic," I said. "Need help narrowing it down?" He ignored me, which meant I was still in the warm-up act. It amuses me that people attribute wickedness to malice. In truth, it is more often the result of a mind untempered by restraint. Wetherell's crime was not hatred, but excess, intellectual gluttony. The man consumed more than he could morally digest. "That's one way to put manslaughter," I said. He looked at me, half-lidded. "You persist in calling it that. It was murder, though perhaps not deliberate. The distinction, I suppose, is of little comfort to the dead." I settled into my chair, stretching. "You think he meant Frayne to take it?" "Of course he did. The temptation of validation is irresistible to men like Frayne. Wetherell needed a witness to his success, someone to confirm that his tampering had achieved potency. When Amos succumbed, Wetherell's vanity must have fractured. Hence his insistence on retrieving the material, concealment masquerading as rescue. He sipped his beer, savoring it like a man reviewing a confession. Pooh! What disturbs me is the trespass. That he entered here, of all places. A man invading another's sanctum is a gesture of pure insolence. It is, in essence, an assault upon reason. You mean your reason, I said. Reason has no owner, he replied, but I am its tenant. That, from Wolfe, was equivalent to an outburst. I let it sit for a moment before changing the subject. Saul called while you were shaving your conscience. He said the boarding house is clear. Anders has been released. Kramer's convinced he's more gardener than criminal. Good, Wolfe said. A simple man, deluded by loyalty. He will likely return to his soil. The world is safest when simple men are near it. He closed his eyes. Miss Frayne will inherit a reputation, not wealth. She will despise it, then protect it. Dr. Cheng will resign, publish something dry to cleanse her name, and continue the same work under a new banner. And Wetherell will spend the rest of his life rationalizing that what he did was unfortunate rather than unforgivable. Thus equilibrium returns. Humanity may proceed to ruin itself in orderly fashion once again. Neat little ending, I said, except for one thing. His eyebrow twitched. Yes, the pumpkin. He opened one. Do not provoke me. I'm serious. You said yourself, the compound reacts to organic tissue. If that's true, somebody had to neutralize it. You told Lydia to destroy what was left, but did you check that she did? His gaze lingered on me for a long beat. Then he sighed. I did not. However, I have no intention of pursuing the matter. If she has erred, the error will correct itself. You mean if she keeps it, she'll pay for it? I mean, he said, that some lessons require the intimacy of consequence. That was Wolfe for you, half oracle, half executioner. I dropped it, though I made a mental note to call Lydia in a few days. Maybe to check that she'd taken his advice, or that she was still breathing. The rest of the evening went in the slow, comfortable way they often do after the world's chaos has been folded back into Wolfe's order. He read. I typed. Fritz hummed in the kitchen. The clock ticked as if it too respected the schedule. Then, around 9, the phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. His voice was flat. You'll want to tell the boss, he said. There's been a small fire at the city lab. Chemical accident. They think it was a disposal experiment gone wrong. My stomach tightened. Anyone hurt? One fatality, Saul said. Dr. Cheng. I looked at Wolfe. He had already stopped reading as if he'd heard through the air itself. Saul, I said quietly, don't mention our connection unless Kramer asks. Already didn't, he replied. Good night. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were open and ancient. So, he said softly, the residue concludes its course. Cheng? I asked. He nodded. She could not leave the riddle alone. Scientists rarely can. She must have tested it again, alone, incautious, perhaps still doubting my deductions. An error of pride, precisely like Wetherell's. Fitting symmetry. I poured 2 fingers of brandy and set one glass by him. And Lydia? She will read of it tomorrow. It will free her of temptation. The fire has done my housekeeping. He took a slow sip, then looked at me with something almost like weariness. Evan, mankind's hunger for endurance is its surest form of decay. The more it strives to preserve itself, the quicker it rots. Amos Frayne learned that. Wetherell learned it. And now, Dr. Cheng. Sure, I said. But you're still going to have Fritz make that bisque again. He almost smiled. Preservation of pleasure is permissible. It harms no one. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street below gleamed under the lamplight. The city was quiet, caught between endings and appetites. Inside, Wolfe reached for another sip of beer and said, "That will be all for tonight, Evan." I shut off the light and left him there, still immense and entirely unbothered, while the faint scent of pumpkin lingered in the air like a ghost that hadn't decided yet whether to rest. The next morning began with an unusual sound. Silence that wasn't complete. It had an edge, the faint hum of something unresolved, like a violin string still vibrating after the last note. Fritz was in the kitchen, but quieter than usual, and the air in the brownstone had a weight that wasn't just humidity. When I came down, Wolfe was already in the office. That alone was enough to make me pause in the doorway. He was in the yellow robe he reserves for mornings after disappointment, sitting with his hands folded, staring not at the orchids, not at the mail, but at nothing. "Coffee," he said without looking up. "Already on its way," I told him. "Fritz says you skipped breakfast." "I found the eggs insubordinate," he murmured. "Sit, Evan." That tone didn't invite questions. I sat. He waited until Fritz brought the coffee, set it down, and left before speaking again. "Kramer called," Wolfe said. He wanted to confirm that Dr. Cheng's death was accidental. I agreed. I waited. He didn't move, and when Wolfe doesn't move, it's usually the world that's about to shift. I also agreed, he continued, that the incident should remain unlinked to our investigation. That was the pragmatic choice. But the truth, as usual, resists convenience. She didn't just mishandle the formula. He shook his head. No, she was too competent for that. The report described localized ignition, flame that burned only what it touched. The catalyst was self-contained. That is not mishandling. It is demonstration. Meaning. Meaning, he said, someone replicated the compound, possibly a variant. I leaned back. You think Wetherell managed to pass on his notes before we caught him? Unlikely. But ambition breeds imitation. The world teems with scavengers eager to profit from the detritus of greater men. Any leads? He frowned, and that alone was worse than a thunderclap. Kramer mentioned an anonymous inquiry made to the precinct 2 nights ago, someone asking whether the Frayne estate had any claims on unpatented research materials. The caller hung up before giving a name. I suspect that same someone now possesses a diluted or corrupted version of the substance. Dr. Cheng's death may have been an experiment, either her own or another's. Great, I said. Just when we'd cleaned up the mess, it leaks out again. Indeed, Wolfe said, and this time, we cannot rely on the comfort of confession. He turned to me. You will visit Miss Frayne. Ask her precisely what she destroyed and how, and verify that none of her uncle's papers survived through her attorney or estate trustees. Be tactful, but thorough. A lie now, however polite, could be lethal. Right away, I said, standing. Evan, he added, do not underestimate the charm of possession. Even the well-intentioned find it difficult to part with brilliance. By the time I reached Lydia Frayne's apartment on Riverside Drive, the city had already turned the day into grey glare. She opened the door looking smaller somehow, as if the previous week had taken something permanent out of her. She wore plain black, the kind of simplicity that announces exhaustion. I wondered when you'd come, she said, stepping aside. I heard about Dr. Cheng. It's awful. Yeah, I said. Awful's one word. Mr. Vale sent me to confirm a few details. She led me to the parlor, neat but stripped. Boxes lined the wall, each labeled and sealed. She gestured to them. Those are the papers. The police oversaw the burn. Everything went. There's nothing left. You sure? Her gaze flickered. Yes. Which meant no. Lydia, I said gently. I don't write reports for Kramer. I work for Vale. He doesn't care about appearances, only accuracy. So if there's anything you kept, something you couldn't bear to throw away, you'd better tell me now. Her shoulders slumped. There was one page. I didn't mean to keep it. It was folded inside a letter from my uncle. I found it after the fire. She went to a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed and faintly scorched at one edge. On it, a formula scrawled in Amos Frayne's tight handwriting. Numbers, symbols, and one word underlined twice. Temper. "Mr. Vale said it was dangerous," she whispered. "But look, it's not complete. It's just notation. I thought it was harmless." I stared at the page. There was a faint orange stain along the fold, like something once liquid had kissed the paper and dried. "Has anyone else seen this?" I asked. "No one. I swear." I believed her, mostly. But belief isn't currency with Wolfe. "I'm taking it," I said. She hesitated. "It's all I have left of him. And it's the one thing that could make sure no one else ends up like him." Her hand shook as she gave it over. "Tell Mr. Vale I don't want to know what happens next." "Neither do I," said. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting. He didn't ask what I'd found until I handed him the page. He studied it for a long moment, then murmured, "So it persists. Think it's genuine?" He nodded once. "Genuine, but incomplete. The notation for temper, that word is not decorative. It signifies equilibrium, the key to stabilizing volatility. Amos Frayne must have realized too late that he lacked it. Without that balance, the substance consumes itself, and anything it touches." He placed the paper on the blotter and stared at it the way a chess player studies a final move. "Burn it?" I asked. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "We must confirm whether others know it exists. If so, burning one copy is as futile as morality and commerce." He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "Heaven, this discovery will not rest. The essence of fire is not to burn once, but to seek fuel indefinitely." I didn't like the sound of that. "You think someone's still after it?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that before the week ends, someone will knock at this door pretending to be a friend of the dead. And they will ask a question that tells me whether they deserve to join them." The phone rang then, sharp, immediate, almost theatrical. Fritz answered in the hall, then called softly, "Mr. Vale, a gentleman insists upon speaking with you. He says it concerns the Frayne formula." Wolfe's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You see, Evan, Providence is punctual." He reached for the receiver, and I watched as his fingers rested on it, deliberate and calm, the way a hunter touches a snare just before it springs. Wolfe lifted the receiver as though it were an afterthought, his eyes half-lidded but bright with that particular kind of attention that always meant someone was about to regret calling. I watched from my usual post near the globe, where I could listen without pretending not to. "This is Vale," he said, voice cool as a cellar. "Yes. You may state your business." There was a pause long enough for the radiator to exhale twice. Then Wolfe's expression altered, a faint tightening around the eyes. Not surprise, but recognition. "I see," he said. "You're at the corner of 35th and 9th. Very good. Come to the door. You will not be admitted until I determine whether your presence serves reason." He hung up. "Who is it?" I asked. "A man who calls himself Mr. Candle," Wolfe said. "Our courier of ghosts." That made me straighten. "The same candle Wetherell used?" "The same, though apparently more durable than his employer anticipated." 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, and I met Candle in the hall. He looked wrong for the part of a hired courier. Trim suit, clean hands, eyes like slate, and the kind of politeness that feels manufactured. He walked in without needing to be invited, which told me more about his nerve than his manners. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. He simply gestured toward the red leather chair opposite his desk. Candle sat with a calmness that was both studied and irritating. "Mr. Vale," he said, "I'm told you've interfered in an unfortunate matter involving the late Amos Frayne." I'm here on behalf of parties who have a legitimate interest in what remains of his research. Parties, Wolfe repeated. Plural. Always a sign of cowardice divided into shares. I assure you, Candle said, smiling slightly. The interest is purely scientific. Wolfe looked at him as though he'd just uttered a joke in poor Latin. You delivered materials for Grant Wetherell. You entered the Frayne property. You removed nothing because the substance you sought was no longer stable. Since then, you have attempted to reacquire a formula you do not comprehend. What exactly is your current employer's interest? Profit or immunity? Candle's smile held, but his eyes shifted. I represent an international consortium. They're prepared to offer compensation for the safe transfer of any surviving documentation. Generous compensation. And if I decline, then I'll assume you're holding it, and others will come who are less civilized than I am. Wolfe's tone remained almost tender. Mr. Candle, I'm always fascinated by men who threaten me while seated. It suggests a misplaced faith in anatomy. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The temperature in the room had already dropped 10 degrees. Candle leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think you've ended this? You haven't. People like Frayne always leave pieces scattered. You can destroy paper, but not what's already in circulation. The formula's out there. You can't stop it. Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the envelope on his desk, the one that held the fragment Lydia had surrendered. You overestimate circulation. The compound's instability ensures its own demise. What remains will consume itself, as will anyone foolish enough to touch it. Candle stood. Then you won't mind if I confirm that personally. I was in motion before the words finished leaving his mouth. He reached for the envelope, but my hand closed on his wrist halfway there. His composure cracked, just enough to show the steel beneath. For a moment we were both still, the sound of our breathing the only movement in the room. Let him go, Evan, Wolfe said softly. He has seen what he needed. I released him. Wolfe's eyes never left Candle. You came expecting to barter with intellect, Wolfe said. Instead, you found consequence. Take a message to your consortium. Curiosity is not a virtue when it forgets its limits. If they pursue this further, the ashes of Frayne's work will not be the only residue they inherit. Candle adjusted his sleeve, pretending he hadn't just lost something intangible. You can't scare everyone into silence. No, Wolfe said. Only the wise ones. He gestured toward the door. Go. Candle hesitated, then left without another word. When the sound of the front door faded, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Want me to follow him? I asked. No, Wolfe said. He will not return. He has tasted futility, and it will linger. He picked up the envelope, studied it for a long moment, then held it out to me. In the fireplace, please. I crossed to the hearth. The fire was low, steady, the perfect temperature for a slow erasure. The paper curled instantly, darkened, and turned to feathered gray. The word temper flared once in red before collapsing into ash. When it was done, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing. Thus concludes the last of the hidden fire. You think that's true? I asked. No copies, no vials hidden somewhere. He opened one eye. Truth, he said, is rarely absolute, but occasionally it allows itself the courtesy of closure. He reached for his bear. Evan, inform Fritz that we will have roast duck tonight. Civilization requires small compensations. I smiled. Sure, you've earned one. Pfui, he said. Earned implies labor. I merely endured humanity until it revealed itself. The clock struck 7. Outside, the city was settling into its evening rhythm. The muted hum of taxis, the hiss of wet tires, the occasional shout that never quite reached the windows. Inside, the brownstone breathed again, restored to its equilibrium. Wolfe raised his glass. To equilibrium, he said quietly. I nodded. And to fire that stays hidden. He allowed himself the faintest smile. Precisely. And that was the end of it. The formula, the fire, the folly. By the next morning, Candell had vanished from the city. Lydia had left for Maine, and the papers called Chung's death a tragic scientific mishap. Wolfe refused every interview request, of course. He claimed publicity was a disease of lesser men. So life in the brownstone resumed its stubborn rhythm. Orchids, cases, and the daily defense of reason. But sometimes, late at night, when Fritz's kitchen was dark and the city's hum pressed faintly through the curtains, I caught the faintest trace of something in the air. Sweet, metallic, almost warm. Maybe memory. Maybe the last whisper of the pumpkin's hidden fire, burned but not extinguished, waiting in the silence for someone foolish enough to light it again.